Yeah, don't worry, people. Do not panic. I'm here. Good evening, everyone. Good evening, good evening, good evening. It's nice to see a couple of people in chat. Good evening, AJ. Of course, I've got the great ankle, Mars, Chantel. We've got David, Josephine, Manpreet as well. Anjali's just joined us. Good evening, Anjali. Nick, good to see you. And of course, the great Valentine. It's been a minute. Has been a few minutes since I was last here, so welcome back. I'm here to bother your eardrums a little bit. It's nice to have everyone back on a Friday evening, back for some good bits and bobs, and fix whatever's going on with my computer right now, as it is not quite responding. So it's been a few minutes. We're going to have a good look at some bits and pieces today. But just before we do get going, am I coming through loud and clear? If not, at least through on that side. Just to double check. Yeah, wonderful. All right, good to say that. Wonderful. Just gonna put that onto the main frame so we can have a look at this. And actually, I'm playing around with my camera settings, so would it be helpful if you could tell me too if one of the two options are probably what's best? What is best? If this option one is best, you're gonna have to tell me option one. Option one means though that I'm never actually getting much eye contact with you. I'm probably just going to show you my the top of my head. Option two, however, is somewhat more eye contact-ish. I will try to look over, but it is sort of ill positioned, so you're going to see me from the angle much more. Which one? One and two. One and two, and two says Nick. All right, well, it's going back to two. It used to be on two, and then I got told maybe put it on one, but now two. So it's good to be there. Yeah, but of course, it's where it is. What are we gonna do today, folks? Is actually a bit of a Friday fun day. If I'm sharing what I believe I'm sharing. Yeah, that's coming through. Okay. What I'm gonna do, folks, is I'm gonna send you a link to a just a quick poll I made because today's day is a little bit open ended in the fact that we can do almost anything we want to within bounds, within certain reasons. So if you don't mind, if you would like to, sort of tell us where we want to go this evening, have a look in the chat. You're going to find a link that takes you to this particular place, and if you wanted to go on your phone or perhaps scan the QR code, but click the link. I think it's easier. Just choose one of the options to tell us what is probably best, or what are you most interested in going through this evening. We're doing it this way partly because we're such a big group and we always have different levels or different interests that I want to just give it to the masses, see where we are with things. So going right from the beginning all the way to the end. It's one of those options, one of those modules which I'm going to leave it in your hands to choose from. Of course it is. Yeah, so I'll give you a couple of minutes on that end too. And what else? What news is there? While I'm waiting for the news for the modules to come through, I'm not too sure I can tell you all that much. It's been another week, a whole week in that regard. I'm watching as much Clarkson's Farm as possible. I'm enjoying it. I'm loving that. I'm eating fish and chips today was fish and chips day, I believe. It was. Did anyone get their fish and chips in? I know I didn't. I should have. If that's the case, then do give me a fish and chips in chat so I know you're taking things seriously. So as things are going in, I'm keeping an eye on the chat too. I'm seeing that module one, module six, Nate, and 10, with 8 automation seeming to take the lead there. If actually this one is pretty small, so chances are I'll do automation with a little something else on the side too because it just has to fill in. Yeah, Nick had fish and fin. Yeah, is that just a wet fish or did you actually have fish and chips? Not that I can check, but I'll trust your word on it. Yeah, it was seemingly, apparently, if you trust Google or Bing in this case, what is it about Fish and Chips Day that makes it such a event, eh? Well, if you, Diane seems to think that it should be had this way. Oh, that does look nice. Folks, what do we think? Fish and chips should come on a plate or in a kind of box like this? Box or plates? Is that Harry Ramsden? No, it's not. I thought it was that famous place in Southampton. In paper seems to be why. I wouldn't have it with anything else. It's just sometimes we have crimes against ourselves. We decide to not go the conventional route. Yeah, everyone says box. The worst thing a restaurant can do, it's so disappointing when they put that into a little like a cup. I hate it. When chips can come in chips in a cup. Not that common, but it seems to be not what I'm actually fries. I can't find what I'm looking for, or Google's not giving me the answer. wrapped in a newspaper. You don't eat the newspaper. You don't put that down. Spit it out. Yeah, mine is so well. The chippy near me is so greasy, just partly just to absorb it, so it doesn't melt in your hands. It is utterly, utterly greasy, and yet they're still around the corner every single weekend. It's how they like three chips, not like a lot. Yeah, yeah. So the marketing around, especially Five Guys and the like, is well, they'll give you a little bit extra just to make it seem like you got more bargain for your money. Especially if it comes like in a paper bag, and you say, "Oh, I love those bag chips." Everyone's favorite, the leftovers, the things that got kind of scraped at the bottom of the bag. You kind of don't pay for them, but it's they'll make you happy in other ways. Um, there's no such thing as an electric or elastic chip service, so I can't go into too much today. But what I will go into today is, as we see on screen, I think I'm going to close this up. Is folks, thank you for joining. Thanks for voting. I'm leading with modules 6, 8, and then we're going to roll around to a 1 and 2, 1 and 10 rather. So that's actually quite nice because these two modules are nice and short, nice and sweet, and then we'll do a little bits and bobs on the side. So that's the plan, if anything. Oh, someone's just giving 9 just to be difficult. Not at all. We'll go through that too. If yeah, roughly speaking, module wise, 9, 10. These are all 40 minutes as well, so I can do them too. Shall we get on to it? No point in me just talking about myself all day, eh? What I'll do is I'll just put the I'll just get bits and bobs ready on screen so I can at least have something as we're going through those modules. What I'll do is I'll begin with automation. Seems like an interesting one to get going with, and we'll take it from there. If I just find the modules. Oh, there it is. Yeah, looking completely the wrong place, and that's more like it. Sounds like a plan, Stan. Okay, well, in you come. It's so annoying. I've got all these monitors, and then none of them are where I want them to be. Okay, so this is probably that. There you go. Let me know, folks. That is coming through. I believe you can see, or you tell me what you can see instead of putting words in your mouth. So I can.
Yeah, you can see the architect in an AWS slide.
Bang on. Right. Cool. 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 Yeah. Okay. So this is module 8. This is one that this is on the latter end of the modules, if you remember from studying this way, this is continuing on this design that's just come about with monitoring and scaling, which is that of designing patterns. I actually dropped in yesterday with the architecting club on Thursday, which is going really, really well. So this is a broader topic around designing in architecture. We want to consider perhaps automation as a way to save us a bit of time, how to be more consistent, and how to remove some of the manual operations that go along with maintaining your environments. Long story short is that humans are bad in this regard. The less we do, the better it seems. And as we look into the course too, you're going to see that this is kind of a growing end, or your technical maturity is often associated with how little you do, which means that if you're taking this all in, automation is probably a way to cue towards those best practices in terms of security and reliability and performance and the other pillars too. So the less we do, the better it would seem. Let me throw back to yourselves then. Checking the following question: have you used any of these provisioning tools? Okay, so the CLI black box configuration. That is the little, so we're referring to those 2 lines at the beginning of our setting up our CLI profiles. We do need a bit of workaround to first prove who we are, authenticate that we are indeed who we are, trying to send off a remote call. I'll give you that. So we have used the CLI command before. And if it's a means to an end, on the other side of the CLI, if you imagine this proverbial black box with sending an API or shooting that off to the so-called cloud, what is that we've ended up using or deploying in this way? All right, cool. So we can a couple of CloudFormation seems to be the biggest one. All right, CloudFormation again, yeah. Josephine, no, that's fine. So perhaps you've used it, at least if you've done a lab, Josephine, then I know you've used a few of these before. Okay, have you at least heard of them before, Josephine? If that's or surrounding these technologies, at least in passing. That's fine if you haven't. Just let me know. Okay, well, maybe if we haven't used them yet, but perhaps coming into terms of what they do, this is still very much the notion of automation. So if you look at them all together, the kind of thing that draws them all together is that Well, perhaps automation doesn't come up immediately, but as we start to think about operational excellence and maybe creating an environment, creating more environments on top of that, we want to definitely use automation for sure. Yeah, for sure. So if you've ever done a lab, then absolutely, you've used CloudFormation and think about all the different labs that have had to have been provisioned by all the different people in the world. On top of that, too, they have to be done in such a way to save time and have consistency of those environments. So they always end up in this such the same way. We're trying to reduce our operational burden. Okay. Okay, what we'll do is we'll jump through these ones. We'll talk a little bit specifically now about CloudFormation. So we've seen them all across in the labs. We're taking a closer look here too, and then the high-level objectives here are understanding how automation can be performed. Again, just many times simplifying what we've got, just to focus on what our services are and doing less of that, and then how to build them as well, how to maintain them. We'll check in with Amazon Q. We'll play around with that too. Why not? Okay, so we'll check in with our CTO in this case. Surely they're talking about agility. They're talking about the way that they want to create environments sort of at the drop of the hat is something that is valued in this case. So, and the ideas here, often an acronym that gets thrown around a lot in this world is infrastructure as code. Infrastructure as a service, infrastructure as code. It's something that could be valued too. So as we'll talk more about infrastructure as code, this is really an idea of treating your infrastructure, your compute, your databasing, your networking, your infrastructure, yeah, all that thing together, plug that into this so-called template, and then use that in such a way that it can then be developed further. It can be something that we can take learnings from our software style and then impress them on hardware, even virtual as well instead of AWS. So the developer in this case is asking, how do they want to deploy without redoing work? They want to simplify. It's very likely then that they want their development environment to look like one that's already in the current region that they're in. Yeah, we can do things manually, sure, but there is a real danger that when things are done manually, the danger is making mistakes. I mean, we're humans after all. There's such a much, there's only so much attention one can do, and sometimes you don't have enough coffee, and then sometimes you have too much coffee, and then sometimes you make mistakes. Okay, so what we want to do is remove the human element out of this when creating environments at scale. Especially when we want environments to be consistent. Okay. So the service for the job is CloudFormation. It does join the dots together in that consistent way. Okay. So first of all, this idea that gets thrown about too, this idea of infrastructure as code. Just for the question, would I use Lightsail in this? No. What it does share in, I love Lightsail. Lightsail is one that gets cast aside as so it is, for those that haven't seen it, Lightsail is a platform as a service. I'll get drawn into it in just a moment, but why don't I show you in this console what I was doing? Here. So Lightsail, it is, for those that don't know, it's an EC2, which I'm pretty sure everyone knows. It's the first service we'd probably look at. Well, it's an EC2. That's all there is to say. But it's an EC2 that people will use or might rely on if you don't know much about the cloud. So it's a halfway house between, I know I need the cloud, I don't know anything about Amazon's cloud, but I know enough about virtual machines. Lightsail is that happy medium. I know roughly what a region is. I know what a Linux platform is. I know what software I'm deploying if I should choose to go from one of these options, and then off you go. It's an EC2, folks, but it's easier. Okay, it's a baby EC2. So is it infrastructure as a service? Not really, because while it does share some of those, talking about operational excellence, the way we can get deployed faster, it still requires me to click the big orange button. If only I could do that in such a way that it deploys this consistently in more than just, more than just one service at a time, then that would be ideal. Are you with me? Yeah. Well, so it is. It shares elements of it being repeated and consistent, but ultimately it's just a service. It's just one product. What I want though is a way to scale out full environments, full architectures at scale. So this just won't do it if only just by scale. If only by range of services. What I would like to do is perhaps maybe draft that into a CloudFormation template. That's perfectly possible. And we'll do that later, why not? So can I create Lightsail resources? I'm not sure why you would want to necessarily. You could probably just do an EC2, but hey, why not? If you're still going through the easy route, sure. So this is just zooming out further and thinking about the entire infrastructure at one go. Yeah. Okay. Well, it's really, really simple. If only just to prove how simple it is, let's just log in. Let's just do one. There we go. So literally one click, I have deployed an EC2, which fair enough, it doesn't seem too out of the ordinary. Well, I've deployed a WordPress, as a matter of fact, these which you can also do as well with an EC2 because they're the same thing. But it would involve me knowing a little bit more about where I'm deploying this into, thoughts about regarding availability, key pairs, and so on. Well, this is an option, but it's kind of simplified for me because I have everything in one go. I have everything here. There you go. Set up my website. Hi, Valentine. Not too sure what you mean. No model. Chantal. Do you want to explain that perhaps? Sorry, not screaming. But what do you mean by the model?
No, sorry, when you just press the light cell, did it give you an option for the model and the memory and all that stuff? Did it give you an option for that?
Oh, sure. Yeah, sure thing. Why don't we delete that again? I'll go back and show you because I would actually like to log into. So let's do it again. Create an instance. I will not go for WordPress this time. Just go for that. There you go. So I think that's what you were referring to by type. Is that right? The size? So
Yeah. Yeah, I see.
very
Yeah.
doubling up until infinite. Yeah, so that's pretty standard stuff. The more you pay, the more you get, etc. It's an EC2. They're using the same dimensions as that, but they just cut up by a month. The only thing that it does do is that my okay. Evening session. I'll just delete that later. Cool. So it's the same thing. Where I'm not automating anything of what I'm doing. If you can tell, it's clearly quite a boring process for me to have to go and do. Not necessarily the thing that it's not uninspiring to do either. Deploying the infrastructure is perhaps the sexier end of what one does because most of it's just reading and kind of thinking it through. But here is the part that actually everything comes in together. So obviously spending is more interesting than looking at the balance sheets ultimately. The point is that this is an EC2 that we can connect to, we can understand, we can take snapshots, and it's all just a little bit easier to work with. So it's your Duplo blocks instead of your Lego blocks.
Question.
Yeah, sure, Dennis.
Why does it need a static address, IP address?
Good question. So static, are we talking about the difference between elastic and static? If that's so static versus elastic IP addressing, is that right?
No, because I was playing around with Lightsail today. Because I'm looking for cheap hosting because it's 3 months free. And when I was trying to do it, kind of asked for a static IP address to connect the instance to. I just went along, but not sure why I needed that. Because if I was hosting through GoDaddy, I'm not going to need a static IP address. So why is it different? Is it because AWS is in a private network or?
Okay. So when you told me you're routing through GoDaddy, have you made purchase of an IP address with GoDaddy or a domain name?
I bought the domain from GoDaddy. I didn't want to pay the $9.99 a month.
Okay.
So I came here, I saw the cheapest one, which was $3.50, and I launched Lightsail, but I think it said I needed a static IP address, which I created and attached to the instance. I'm just wondering, why do we need it for Lightsail, but we don't need it for something like GoDaddy?
Okay, so why with that, if it'll be easy if I show you in Route 53. Where am I? Have you noticed too, the console is a little bit simplified because it's meant to be a simple EC2 for those that just don't know how to use it much. For researchers, for just experimenting and so on. To answer your question, it's still there because what we're doing is to draw a picture. You've got your IP address, which we'll come to in a second, but you've made purchase already off a domain name, so dennis.com, okay, whatever it might be. Yeah. Now, if I'm going to go and hit dennis.com as a user, then I have to land somewhere. The purpose of DNS, if you're familiar, how that works, is a process of regurgitating or asking questions, really. Do you know where Dennis.com is? If not, yes. If not, no. You're going to ask your authoritative name server, your AN, for that answer. If they don't know, your resolver might pass the message upstream, essentially. So eventually one person is going to know the answer of where is that server, or where is that, infrastructure that is being hosted in the internet. Because my computer doesn't know. We're sort of we're walking in the dark until we really know where to go. The problem is that I only know Dennis.com, but I have no idea or no notion of where the IP address is behind this. So often you'll think that there's no IP address, but in fact there has to be. You've bought yourself a domain, or rather you've registered a domain name, and all that the GoDaddy are doing is that they're responsible for the hosting of the name server records that translate to the actual, to the name files. And so the name files, you'll have something called an X509 certificate. And the next 509 certificate has things like so who owns it? Also like the authenticity, the expiration, and other bits and pieces about admin wise. But most importantly is the actual IP addressing, what we call a class A record. So have you had a chance to look around in Route 53 at all, Dennis? Let me just close this up.
I did change the class A in GoDaddy to point to the static IP address from Lightsail.
Oh, that's it.
Kind of got idea what you're talking about.
So, I mean, with Route 53, with GoDaddy, you're not actually. It sounds like you bought a domain with them, you bought a name from them, but not actually anything underneath that. There's no compute, if that's a fair say.
There's nothing. Yeah.
So we still have to land on that web server. We're not getting around. We have to land somewhere, and that where is on Amazon's end of the bargain. So we could do this, with DNS, and it's not just one DNS server, by the way. There's of course many. That's what makes it so redundant. So GoDaddy are responsible for storing that across 4 different name servers all around the world. They're super redundant. It's such and such. They have other clever techniques when it comes to I don't know what they call it, but it's a way of partitioning or sharding parts of that information, so that even if one name server went down, because, for example, so Dennis.com could be on this one particular name server, as could Coca-Cola.com, and that could be DDoS, that could be subject to a ransom attack, or just in some way inundated as that to bring that server down. Well, little old you, and you're, unfortunately, because you're on that same server, could you be affected? Not quite, because what they've done as a minimum is redundantly store those name server records across 3 others, a total of 4 other servers in the world. So at a minimum, you're not with high probability ever going to be down in the dark. So your £3, £4 a year, that simply goes down into the space in the storage. Sorry, what I'm going for is hosted zones, for what they call a hosted zone. I'm not sure what GoDaddy call it, but the same thing I'd play, right? So Dennis.com, and then the show. The difference being, would I like to make this publicly available, or would I prefer to have this intranet, so only people accessible to my own local network and my own router could find this website? The difference between this is, well, these hosted zones are just part of the internet where it is queries can be heard back and answered. So inside of this hosted zone, you're going to have the name server record, the start of authority, and you're right to point out that you're going to have so your 4 name server records, but they don't answer to anything, right? Until, okay, I'm trying to get to Dennis.com. So the flow would be like this. I'm on my computer. I'm trying to get to Dennis.com, but I don't know what the IP address is, because that's really what the EC2 is behind, or the Lightsail instance, or the container, whatever it is. How on earth do I get there? Well, what's really going on is the domain name system is a matter of recursion, of asking questions. I'm going to principally ask my router. Does my router know? Probably not, because my router doesn't know every namespace in the world, less so if it's a website that's just been kind of started up a few seconds ago. There's no way he's going to have that much internal database. So minimally, what you can think of is kind of a router having this database of sorts, where it's got like on one column maybe the name, and on the other column maybe like the IP address, and maybe some information is kind of cached, but not too many. Obviously, it's just a small device. So with high probability, we go off and ask, the bigger thing, which is our authoritative name server, our ANS. That's often done with your ISP, with your internet service provider, and they're responsible for keeping a tab on like the big names. So your .coms, your .orgs, your the big ones, your .co.uk's, and etc. Because minimally, what I don't know is where it is, but I at least know it does end with a .com. So somewhere in the world, there are some name servers, and those name servers contain information relating to the .com. So this might be the .com server. There could be another one here called the .org server. There could be another one here called the .tv server, and so on. Well, I'm not interested in those. I know that this has an answer, and if it doesn't have, because again, for matter of redundancy and availability, perhaps we don't want to have everything in one go. So if it might be distributed, it might actually be a little bit further down. So this is when becomes a game of Chinese whisper. And we'll be like, I don't know, but you can ask a friend, or a friend of a friend might know. And eventually, by matter of recursion and bubbling its way back up to you, you're going to get to an authoritative server, an AS, who finally has that answer and says, oh yeah, I know where it is, because I, GoDaddy, I'm being paid £3 a year or a month so that I can store that information of, if you're looking for Dennis.com, well, this is the IP address, the equivalent IP address for you to go ahead and search. And that's what's stored in, you're paying for that little line of entry. And of course, the business on top of this too is that it's always going to be available, blah, 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 blah. So you've got the answer, you know where it is, you still need to get there. So that after that, what happens is that line of record comes back to you, and your computer now says, oh, okay, now I know where to go. I'm going to go straight to that IP address because this IP address is where I was. Whether that's a public IP, because a public IP address is both a static and an elastic, slight difference between them in Amazon's case, but either one being public is accessible online. So you will still need to have a registrar as well as a registry, if you see the two. A registrar is where you can go off and where you can register for domains. Sorry, which one's which? Well, one is where I can actually buy domains. So is Dennis.com available? Probably not. Yeah, it's not available. But I can buy other, similar ones there too. Obviously, the nature of the internet is you can't double dip. There has to be unique addresses there. So we can have denniscom.com, and I could buy this for a little bit more, actually. Amazon's Route 53 is a bit more expensive than GoDaddy or others as well. But it doesn't have to be even paid. Like, obviously, you're paying for the privilege of having a custom domain name. There are many places where you can just get free DNSs too, free DNS names. Some charities do that too. Is it this one? Oh, can't remember. I used them once or twice before. I can't remember. Sorry, but there is a way of getting that on the cheap. So this is great. That's answered how do I get there, but it doesn't answer what is there behind this. Behind the name is still the compute. So I think that's where you are now, Dennis. Does that part make sense until there? How did I lose you there, perhaps?
No, I understand, but I think what I was wanting to find out was why is it a static address? Why is it not just a normal IP address? So I'm just wondering, is it because AWS is more like a private network, so you need a static address to connect to the outside world if you're hosting within? Because static address costs money, so
I'll park that aside. Actually, just clear up. Actually, they all cost money now. As one of the things they rolled out rather recently. Are you comparing static address versus elastic IP addresses or dynamic IP addresses? Is that your concern?
No, I just wanted to know if I could why I need it. Like, if you carry on with setting up light sail, you get to the networking part, you see where there's a IP. So if you are connecting to, say, if you buy the IP your domain elsewhere, it will say you must have a static IP address to point the in to. So obviously I didn't want to do that because that costs money. I just wanted to see if there was anything else I could do not to use a static IP address. If there's anything else I could do.
I think Chantel's nailed it too. What clearly is going on is I need a door to open, and that IP address is really just a place in the internet space for us to go and answer to. What makes it chargeable? What makes it a valuable commodity? If you're familiar with how IP version 4 addressing works, this is a scarce resource, supply and demand. There's not many of them left. They're already, they're drying up very, very quickly. So it kind of is wasteful if you don't use them. And even so, what they've now started implementing is, folks, if you didn't know, as of last year, AWS now charges for static and dynamic IP addresses. So previously, this was the case that dynamic IP addresses weren't chargeable, but as of effect, per hour. So this is an encouragement to say, right, folks, come on, lift up, let's go off and let's replace IP version 4 with a slightly newer, better alternative, which is IP version 6. Are you familiar with those two terms, IP version 6 and IP version 4? If that's the case. Yeah? Yeah. So the reason they're chargeable is that, of course, they partly just to encourage you to go off, to stop using them, kind of like the 5p charge with plastic bags in supermarkets, If they kind of encourage you tacitly, then no one's going to adopt them off. So we still need a permanent address, like Chantel says. That IP address will be the thing that's actually in the server needs something. I can't return back with a domain name, because the whole purpose of this was that we could translate Dennis.com to that IP address. We see this, our human eyes, our intuition recognizes Dennis.com, but we're not going to recognize, 123.5. Blah, 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 blah. That's not how that's not how humans think. So really what you're paying is the trade-off or the exchange between these two numbers. And that computation is performed by Route 53 or the DNS. So why do we need a static IP address as opposed to a dynamic IP address? Well, partly it's like musical chairs, because remember, if your DNS server, let's imagine Route 53's name servers, again, those are the 4 servers in the world. And these 4 servers in the world, we said, are responsible for holding onto that information, such as that if I go back to my hosted zones. So Dennis.com has these 4 servers in the world in .co.uk, .net, .com, .org, again, just as distributed as can be, inside of which you're going to find a record, a text record. Well, I haven't made one yet, but that record is the thing I went to store, okay, with whatever behavior I decide that to be. That's not this. The point being that if I just go with the simple one, all traffic that comes and hits those name servers, all of which will be redirected, or shall I say, answered by ... an IP version 4 address. For example, CloudFront, for example, Elastic Beanstalk, for example, Lightsail, but it doesn't have to be. So this is the expensive option, or the free option, which is IP version 6. IP version 6 is using a 32-bit hexadecimal address. It's much, much, much bigger, something to do with grains of salt and things on sand on the beach, much more than atoms in the universe. It's such a high number that it's extraordinarily it's free. There's so many of them to get around that we basically curb all the issues that we had initially with IP version 4, but we're slow to adopt IP version 6 because humanity moves at such a pace. So IP version 4 is kind of getting more expensive, so we kind of move over. So I'm sure if you're seeing the full idea. What I'm telling you is that we still need something to respond to the servers. Obviously, some compute. You're going to hit a point where, after being redirected and having DNS, there really needs to be a server to which to answer to, and that server requires a public-facing IP address. Whether that's IP version 4 and IP version 6, that's more of a technical distinction. But you don't have to go for IP version 6. 4.
But that public facing, can it be a dynamic one?
Sure. In fact,
that's just
IP.
Yeah. Okay. Cool.
I would be so IP version 6 works a little bit different in the fact that there's no such thing as public IP version 6. it's just that's not in his vocabulary because there are so many of them
So many, yeah.
that there's no need to think of them as public and private. Like the whole fancy workaround that we've ever done with public and private IP version 4 was only just because there's not enough. So we've kind of squeezed water out of stone. We've made more than there. We artificially made more with private IP addresses, which are not routable online. It's to sort of get around that fact. But because there are billions or trillions and hexadillions of these, there's no private, there's no public IP addresses. They just are public IP addresses. Bigger scale, then, if you zoom out further, that kind of means that you need to architect your VPC somewhat differently. So there's no such thing as a public or a private subnet. That doesn't exist. You have instead something that's called as egress only internet gateway. Have you heard of this, perhaps? So again, this would be like the reason why. I don't know. I can't explain why, but I'm still in the habit of using IP version 4. Maybe it's a habit, maybe it's force of habit. But again, there are alternatives, and the shift is slowly but surely moving away from chargeable, billable, static or dynamic addressing into something that's IP version 6.
Can I just say as well, in a network as well, some devices are program static because you don't want them to change. You want the IBP to be predictable.
Yes.
And then the dynamic ones normally just for short-term use cases. You hop on, you hop off. You don't need to maintain the IP.
That's right.
Yeah.
So this is all assigned by, you can think of your so DHCP is what assigns the numbers or statically assigns numbers. Usually your printer, usually your smart assistants, things that you're not going to take out the home very often, your router as well. But if your friend comes over and says, can I have your Wi-Fi password? Yes. What they're really asking for is, can I have a seat in your network? Can I have one of those private IP addresses? And you say, yes. Okay, well, they might only be there for a couple of hours. They might leave and never come back. So if that short-term friend is taking up an address, it's not really good if you're kind of limited in that way. So what do? We get them off. We release it. So there is a lease time for every a signature that is handled again by DHCP that says what's going to be there, what isn't there. The ones that are put aside or always there are your static IP addresses. So the ones that, just because of the nature of finding targets easily, because you can always trust that it's going to be the receiving angle, then why bother changing them? It doesn't make sense to change a printer IP address every couple of minutes. It doesn't need that. So whether it's static or whether it's done by you or figured out by itself, there just comes a point where it's so firmly seated in where it is in the network that it becomes part of the furniture. And the ones that don't, the ones that are like hop on, hop off, are your dynamic IP addresses. The slight distinction there is that in Amazon's case, one, you can bring your own IP address licenses, a thing. So you can buy an IP address. You can buy IP addresses individually, right? So let's buy an IP address. Let's go to let's go to IP version 4 global. Anyone want to take just a stab, just a guess? How much do you think an IP address is worth? Like just a run-of-the-mill, bog standard. How much would you buy an IP address for? 30,000. I mean, maybe if it's gold-plated, maybe if that number if it was number one, I think maybe it's a little bit much.
1p
But,
each.
It's an awful lot more than 1p. I'll give you that much. So you can get to this website too. I just Googled it, but it tells me a couple of pounds. My IP address here, owned by my ISP, it doesn't tell me the price because it's already owned. But should I want to go to the auction? Actually, you know what, David, you're pretty much bang on. Oh, almost, because these are, remember, ranges. So that's 65,000 IP addresses, but it's $2 million. So that's what's $2 million divided by 16? Still a little bit more, but that's the price of one IP address. It's more than a couple of p. It's more than £12. All right. So if you're Lord Sugar and you're on the hunt, then yeah, clearly very, 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 very valuable assets. It's like, it's like Bitcoin. It's like anything that's fought over in terms of commodity space. So we don't have enough to go around, which is why they're on the marketplace. You can buy them, you can bring them into your VPC, you can use them that way. And if you were to buy this, then the whole world agrees that that's your IP address because you paid it and it's yours to keep. So that's a static IP address. If it's not a static IP address, it is kind of like you're just sitting on it. You're playing musical chairs. If you're familiar with with musical chairs, right? So everyone stands up, walks around, and then as soon as the music comes off, then everyone finds a chair. The one who's left standing goes without. So you don't always end up on the same chair. So that if you leave the device, your device leaves the network. If you go off and come back, then there's no real guarantee that that is the same IP address. Why is that a concern for us? Well, if you remember back to this example, if now you're telling me that that your name server records that are in these servers, they're storing information about IP addresses. Well, it wouldn't be very helpful if the IP addresses that you purchased were changing every couple of minutes, right? So you're gonna get dead ends. What then is you want a fixed, stable entry point, a static place that's always going to answer to the same request, those query, and those that. Yeah, they're not really subnets. They're just ranges. I think you're seeing the range. If I just go back a sec, if that's what I'm understanding, Chantal, it's not that they're subnets. It's just that subnets are made up of the same material fiber as this. What is this? Well, that's an IP address, but many of them in a row, kind of all in order. If you remember this part here, the mask afterwards, that really relates just well, it's a notation that tells you both how much of the network is made available to you, and also this is where. So where do you begin? Basically from this point onwards, and from this point onwards to 65,000 later, or from this point to, I don't know how many that is exactly. I can't do the conversion in my head, but some amount later. So we see this often employed in subnets, but what subnets are really made up of is just a range of IP addresses, a matter of IP addresses all lined up one next to each other. And these are all public, by the way. That's important. You won't find private IP addresses for sale. If you do, you're being scammed because they're free. Okay, the whole point about private IP addresses is they're public, they're private. Anyone can have them. They just make them out of thin air. They're not real. Okay, so a big tangent there. But then we've come full circle in a sense to Lightsail, and why, in this case, we can go for both IP version 4 and IP version 6. Notice it doesn't even give you IP version 4 only compared to, like, you can't even have that. You just have to go, you have to bundle this into. So it's either IP version 6 only or IP version 6 with IP version 4. Everything else still is the same. Okay. Such a goose chase that I got myself into. But hey, that's fine. Why don't we come back to this? If what we're looking at is infrastructure as a code, right? So it's not a service. What you're not looking at here is Amazon's, it's not a thing that Amazon have invented, far from it. This is more of a concept. This is more of a technique. This is something that's based around this idea that we've understood code. Code and, well, software development is something that's existed for a really long time now. There's obviously a lot of best practices that have come about with typing up code. And they can also be applied here to this idea of managing code, okay? For example, things like versioning, or making a difference between a delta between those different versions, version 1, version 2, version such and such, just to see what's changed. That's something that existed in the software development lifecycle. So these learnings that we get can also be applied now to infrastructure. And then if we can create that infrastructure in a template-sized format, like a little piece of paper, then that's what we're going to be thinking of. So let's think about how we can take up our entire infrastructure, or your IP addressing, or your Lightsail instances, and templatize that up into code. Essentially just a text file, such as that we can take a little bit of paper, feed that into an engine, a CloudFormation engine, and then the output of which is something that we're going to call a stack. And that stack is composed or will relate to all the services, all the resources that we actually want to deploy and use. And well, okay, a lot of benefits to this, of course, one of which being reusability. So we can create our environment and then again, just redeploy that again elsewhere as we need to, as we see fit. We could do this again in multiple regions. We might want to do this way to have multiple environments for different stages of our application. So we might have one, again, just for dev. We have another one here for production. And this gives us consistency throughout the way that we might want to, because it's the same thing. Two, it also reduces our our operational need again to make modifications to our environments every single time a change happens. So we can simplify really just with a template, a piece of paper, and then push out. You can think of this template as emitting all that change out to the different environments. And that's because behind this, CloudFormation, I'm just going to say CF for sure, okay? That keeps track of all the environments in its head because CloudFormation is aware of what it's deployed. And then it changes that are made to the template in a central place can then go off and be distributed to all the environments via that CloudFormation service. So this works, of course, with like everything else. It's still going to use the same AWS APIs that you and I would click through in the console. It's not magic, okay? It's essentially the exact same methods that we would use with the web console, with the command line, with the SDK, just to create that stack, the output of our resources. And because we're making use of all our APIs, everything that we would be able to do with those manual APIs by us clicking and dragging and dropping and all that other stuff, we can now automatically do with the CloudFormation template, which is all automatic. All we have to do is make a template. We create our template, we define what we want, which is usually done up in code somehow. Well, more specifically, it's written up in a code-like language called JSON or YAML, either one. Yet another markup language. And yes, that's actually what it stands for, which then pushes outwards. So far, so good. Again, the actual syntax of what that looks like, perhaps a little bit different. We do have a couple of examples on this slide about what you can see. So this is JSON, the JavaScript object notation. Again, nowadays, nothing to do with JSON. The once upon a time, but not anymore. Okay, it's just now a language interchange format. It's not even programming necessarily, because you and I can clearly make out what's happening. In fact, if I asked it, if I threw this up to yourself, what are we making? So we're passing in the template, and CloudFormation is thinking, or rather is seeing, what? It's not rocket science. What are we making? What are we getting? What are we shopping? Yeah, all right. I agree with you. I do find this more legible because that's kind of what it's for. It's far more human legibility related. Yeah, it's making a bucket. Thank you, Valentine. Yeah, so clearly we're making a bucket, a resource, and it's the same thing either case. David's gone for YAML as a preference. What do you think, folks? Between the two. Stylistically, aesthetically, what do we think? How do you weigh the two up? I should say that they both work, or they're both treated identically. It doesn't make a difference. Yeah, I think that's a clean sheet. Everyone's going for YAML. It is, yeah, it's definitely worth looking at. I wouldn't, again, I'm not going to say learn this because that's pointless. No one learns this. It's just an interchange format. The syntax is really simple. You're going to have colon separated values. They are nested. So notice how this is like level 1, that's level 2, that's level 3. There is, of course, the own like syntax, but colon separated values, it's the same as above, folks. It just doesn't have curly braces. Why? Because that was what JavaScript originally liked a lot and then became sort of commonplace. So it's a lot cleaner for sure. I understand the point of this. It just happens to be that you would have to have an additional step usually in translating JSON to YAML, which is probably why you don't come across it as much, because computers slightly prefer having the order, shall we say, of having and by the way, this has to be very, very strict when it comes to spacing, because you're making some some concessions with not having curly braces. So it, in its own internal syntax, understands two spacing as like one curly brace. So you can't get that wrong. To type, it's a little bit harder. To read, it's a lot easier. Whereas this is kind of the syntax that computers will just natively implement. Doesn't really matter. Ultimately, it's a case of which one you like to look at the most. And I would probably say YAML is easier to read at. The point is, whatever it is, whatever we want though, is the important thing is the resources. That's the template format, which means that we can take these JSON and YAML, the resources inside of them, whatever's been defined, a bucket in our case, and then CloudFormation will take them in, chew it up, and then create the resources right away. So what do we define? What do we describe as the output of that? More technically, it's called a stack. So your stacks are going to be created within CloudFormation, and those are your resources, your AWS resources, mind you. So all of the AWS resources that we talked about and more, you can get really creative with CloudFormation. It supports this idea of custom resources, and these might be resources that aren't actually AWS resources natively at the box, which does mean that you can go off and leverage CloudFormation to automate other things in your environment, because you could actually get CloudFormation to you could have a user data script, you can have a bootstrap sequence inside of this to go off and install some third-party thing. You could install Azure. It doesn't have to be AWS. It has to be AWS infrastructure though, but software, maybe like the parameters inside of the application, that also is fine. It's a good general automation tool. I'll say that. I don't want to confuse us too much with that, but just think of it largely, it's an AWS only thing, okay? Okay, so one of the benefits of having infrastructure as code is this idea of change sets. Let's go back and check, shall we? I'm just going to close this up in case I forget. Okay. Because if I was smart, if I had infrastructure as a code, sure, CloudFormation, whatever, then I could have Route 53 as an answer to creating and deploying and deleting quickly. One of the benefits again of doing this is that we all the learnings we have of code now lend themselves to this idea of infrastructure. So change sets, if you're familiar with GitHub and how you can have versioning or deltas or diffs between that, well, CloudFormation is one of those interesting ideas, because what happens when you first make when you first make infrastructure, whatever that is, a stack is what's going to be stood up by CloudFormation. So I've got a few in my accounts, more than I care to remember. So CloudFormation is going to monitor this stack with an eager eye. It says, okay, well, that's what I've got here. Such as that whatever I do to this stack in terms of resources, again, defined by what we just said before, if what CloudFormation can do is compare the logical ID to the physical ID. And I remember, like in the back of my mind, I remember having such a big argument with Sajid. He was an instructor a few years ago because he was my instructor and I shouldn't have butted back, but I knew I was right. I knew that's what they call it. And he said, you can't call it physical ID because that'll be confusing. So no, that's actually what it's called. If you go to the documentation, if you read it, that's actually what they call it. And I was right. I'm so proud of that. So the physical ID, it's the actual resource, that what they, in their own terms, deem the real resource, the way of relating to the thing that's been deployed. The logical ID, on the other hand, is the thing that lives in the template. Okay, so were I to go to the template, that's what I've described it as. That's what I've named it as. Okay, S3 bucket, a company I work for. Okay, that's what I was doing with. So whatever happens to one actually influences the other. So CloudFormation monitors this stack. And what CloudFormation can do is that whenever a stack is going to be updated, it's going to compare the running stack, the one that currently exists, with the intended changes or the change sets within that template. That's what a change set is. So what that means essentially is a diff between the original stack and the expected change between those new changes. So this change set, I'll just keep it as it is, but I don't know. I don't really want to change it, but I'll give it a tag. Why not? So clearly, not a significant change, but I'm changing my resources in some shape or form. And what is going to happen now is a change set. First of all, it reviews. Basically, this is like a checkpoint of sorts. It says, oh, you want to maybe change this. Okay, there you go. So there is a modification made. And this change set here is like it's like a viewpoint. Essentially, we want to modify our stack that comes out of CloudFormation. And so we modify the template. Notice I didn't go to S3. I didn't actually end up in that service page whatsoever. Everything's done from within the CloudFormation console. So the change set is like a checkpoint. We create a change set, and then maybe that change set says, is that what we expect? Is that really what I wanted to do? So that change will show things that are now created and resources that are modified, and then resources that might be deleted again. And if that all looks good, we can then say, yeah, go ahead, implement that again, and then change to set and have a new stack. But if it doesn't, if I'm not happy with that change set, I go back to the drawing board and then modify that CloudFormation template further. So this entire workflow can even be automated on that too, which means that we can modify the environments confidently. We actually know what's coming out of this consistently, knowing what changes we can then go ahead and expect. In the amount of time we have, unfortunately, I just can't look at all the different aspects of CloudFormation templates. But however, okay, they are pretty straightforward. CloudFormation templates, again, look like this. And they do include a lot of information around the things that we're trying to build. Folks, what's the most important bit of a CloudFormation template? Clues on the screen. What's the most, without this, you can't do anything part. Hey, exactly. Absolutely zilch. I mean, that kind of makes sense, right? Without the thing, there's no thing happening. So the only required element of the CloudFormation template is, like Chantal says, the resources. That's the thing that we're going to build, okay? The other aspects of the CloudFormation template, really just they support this idea of what's happening with the resource. What else? So the key idea of CloudFormation is similar to like a shopping list. You write down on your shopping list the things that you want. I want eggs. I want ham. I want bread. Blah 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 blah. And you write this in the CloudFormation template, and that is your shopping list in AWS. Okay. Like a shopping list, you don't really think much about how to get those objects. You just do that in a way to say what you want. When you say what you want, we call that a declarative language. Okay, a declarative language is one where you just declare, where you just write down what you want. Makes sense? So, as opposed to an iterative language. So, declarative language is one where I just say, it's not really the definition I was going for. It's not even a programming language really, but just to encode a way of programming. Yeah, so it's not a language perhaps, it's just a way in which the programmer specifies the goal or what should be achieved rather than how the goal should be achieved. So let's leave the jinx aside. I don't need to know how CloudFormation does what it does. I'm just interested in what comes out the machine. So this is the idea of I put something into the box and that box spits out what I want. So we can review the template. We can review what I kind of want beforehand with managers or before making any real changes. And when I'm ready, I ask CloudFormation to spit out the environments based on only what's in my template. So it's going to go it's going to head and read and triple check all the syntax. It's going to have a look at all the possible errors that can come about, any missing parameters, any possible dependencies between the things, even reorder the elements in such a way. And finally, after it kind of figures it out, it's going to get the services for you. This means it creates a full environment for us. For example, one thing we can have is this of conditions. So I know Charlie's been doing his Python evenings. If you've attended them, pretty soon you'll hear this idea of conditional logic. So within, well, all programming languages, you have ifs and elses and depends on. Well, we can have conditions inside of CloudFormation template too. We can have different parameters for our environments based on what kind of environment it is. For example, if I say, if this is a production environment, if your environment is a production environment, then maybe I should create the production resources. because maybe we want very large EC2 instances. Maybe we want multi-AZ operations of RDS databases. But if it is the other condition of that being a development environment, if that is the match, then it could be slightly lower power EC2. Maybe we don't know autoscaling. We only use a single availability zone, so we don't need multi-AZ RDS. Again, all can be controlled by conditions in a template. Or a wine. Just to get through the template part, there are other aspects of the template too that we can add inputs we don't need to know so much about. But these are called, again, parameters. Yes. The outputs of that CloudFormation template. Now, why might we want this? Why could outputs be of interest? Well, if there's outputs, there's probably inputs too. And one other aspect of infrastructure as code is that we can start to modularize our environments. What I mean by that is that we don't want to just end up with one huge template that does everything in a stack. No, you shouldn't prescribe this, folks. That's not how the world works. You shouldn't do everything all in one go. Rather, you should have smaller templates that are, I hate saying the word out loud, modularized. Okay, they're modular, they're smaller, they can be decomposed. Maybe around the idea of teams that are going to be involved, maybe around the responsibilities of that too. For example, we might end up with something that we say is our front-end web template. Yeah, so your front-end team is going to work on this. Likewise, you might have a back-end template where you're going to have your back-end engineers on that too. You might have a network-based template, again, or an identity-based template or something else too. If, however, we didn't listen to me and we just said, let's just do everything in one great big template, then everyone would have an input and too many chefs spoil the broth. Rather, we can just have templates that aren't that big, instead of just, they're just specified on specific areas of responsibility. Now, if we're doing it this way, which is what I suggest, some information in your infrastructure, in your environments, might need to be passed around from template to template. You can obviously think, okay, well, let's imagine the network template here, for example. Clearly, that's going to involve things like VPCs, so the ID of the VPC, the security groups, the internet gateway, those kind of things here. Well, these kind of things are going to be defined maybe in a different place than perhaps the actual applications that might use them. Okay, the actual instances that are running on them. So somehow the outputs of one stack then become the inputs of another stack. And this is how you're able to then use multiple templates. This is a pattern that we call nested stacks, where we have multiple templates in a single template. It's, multi-part. So there is still going to be one giant big template of sorts, but it's made up of many, many, many smaller component templates, and then they all then feed in the outputs into parameters of another one. Okay, nested templates like that. All right, that's a really good point to perhaps take a little bit of a break, shall we? Why don't we do this? If just pause for a second for thoughts, questions, answers, questions, queries, and we'll take maybe a break there for a couple of you. 10 minutes or so, and then we can come back and have a look at the next part, because I know that's probably the best time to have your tactical sip of wine. How's that, folks? I'll stick around for any questions, but if that's okay, I'll say come back in maybe 10 minutes time.
Yeah, quick question. When you do nested stacks, right? I mean, you can't, is it random, or is there certain actions you cannot take until you've done something else, if you know what I mean? Is it can you just, I mean, is there any definitive way you do these stacks? Like you go do maybe have certain things before you do this permission, or do this before you do that?
When it comes to deploying, like a house, I guess you can build the windows before the walls, right? So the network might come first, usually come first. I would say, again, these things are more like an art than a science, but definitely put the network and the security comes first. Those things would probably, if you're working with a multi-account structure, that obviously complicates things. But let's see what it prescribes.
Can also put dependencies in, like don't start the EC2 instance until the RDS is up and running.
Yeah, so there is internal logic to this too, where even if you try to, even if you, it doesn't matter where you put it in the template, if an RDS, well, let's imagine like the RDS comes above perhaps the subnet group which it's in, it still figures itself out. Like it knows it knows what the task is. It's a declarative language after all, so we just don't have to tell it how to do it. So long, to a point. If it's completely contradictory, if it doesn't make sense, then it won't make sense. It will validate that for you, but you'll kind of know because it'll scream messages at you saying it doesn't work, it doesn't work. So I don't think you'll get through mistakenly. But you're right, and that also applies both ways. I'm glad you mentioned the RDS instance, because when it comes to tearing down your infrastructure, just as important is preserving the data. So you can have a CloudFormation init signals. So CloudFormation init has this thing here. I don't know what lint is. Linter. Oh, linter. Okay, linter is like a. You know what a linter is like to get cat hairs off your jackets and stuff. It's a way to basically this, just to make it pretty, essentially, just to validate that. But there is actually a thing inside of this. It's called a wait signal and a light signal. CloudFormation lights, not lights, which really just, it's again short for initialize. So you have this sequence of events that say, oh, sorry, it's in Portuguese. Your example was perfectly valid. Like only do an RDS after this thing first, and tie into this idea of outputs and inputs. Well, kind of, I'm gonna do what I have to do first, and then I'll raise the flag. You seeing this, or already the CloudFormation init will see that metadata, or see that state change go, which then initiates the next part. So if priority ordering matters, if you have to have a strict thing to follow, which again, use case dependent, there is ways around this too. But that's in the technical weeds of stuff. So ascending order, descending order. You can have test signals too. Well, anyway, but to answer your question firmly, it's again more like an art than a science. I would start. I don't think I can find any how to build CloudFormation nested. And no one's going to be able to give you a firm answer on this, but start with the thing that usually, and it's fine to edit this afterwards. So, because you're going to have multiple teams that work in parallel to one another, as long as the outputs are, if you have agreed terms, then that's fine. I need your thing, you need to refer to this thing. We'll check in with each other and then see that within the parameter section. Again, so if I go to the console, the outputs of this perhaps, well, this particular bucket, this particular role is more than likely going to then feed into the inputs of another thing there too. I'm not too sure which one happened before. Oh no, bad example actually. Oh yeah, it is. It's a nested stack. Change sets. This will be the best way to actually deploy them. Stack sets is your, so you can manage them kind of at a higher glimpse. But yeah, documentation surrounding this too. I'll pass that on should that be a good point. The rule of thumb though, do the security, do the network first before touching anything else. Do the sensible things first. Yeah. Can't find it. I think this is that's probably the best documentation for this. I'll have a read of that if that's one to help out with. Just because I know that we said we were trying the next module, so if that's okay, I'll try to get a wiggle on so we can maybe squeeze in the next part regarding networking. Hey, okay. So if we move on and we talk about infrastructure management, this is still within the automation module. Generally, there are multiple flavors of this idea if it comes to automation. This is why I didn't dismiss Lightsail off entirely, because I kind of see your point. In fact, we've talked already about autoscaling, from an EC2's point of view. it is a form of automation, but we want to think of automation that maybe pertains more than just the EC2 alone, or more than just the Lightsail instance alone. To think about automation from a different point of view, from an application point of view, with something like Elastic Beanstalk, which is this. So the Elastic Beanstalk is perhaps a tool that you want to think about from the automation point of view. So this is a service that is for application developers. Just think from this point of view. Okay, it's going to be slightly different from this point of service. Pardon me. So this is an application that's made for developers, for application developers, regarding putting things inside of AWS. This means then that application developers have to learn about AWS. If they're going to be working with the cloud, they need to learn the cloud. Okay, not everyone can come to a class like this. Not everyone can spend evenings to learn about the different parts of EC2s and load balancing and VPCs and RDS and all this and that. Application developers are focused on what they do, which is their code. Just like you know your world, they know their world. They don't necessarily understand much about cloud infrastructure. In many cases, then, these application developers are looking to make, say, web applications. Then it is Amazon Web Services, after all. Web services in relation to application developers means that often very common environments where their code tends to be like a web server. In other words, like an EC2 running web server software like Apache. What that means is that the environments that are needed by that application developer tend to be quite common, and Elastic Beanstalk knows this. It uses, again, it makes the most of commonality by crafting resources in response to the application developer's code to match the requirements. So, for example, the output of the Elastic Beanstalk, you could perhaps make an EC2 instance with that Apache web server inside of it. But it could also include the CloudWatch alarms. It could also optionally include the RDS database instance. It could also include logging on top of that too. Furthermore, like, it also has high availability too. That's also made with auto-scaling groups and load balancing and too. So Elastic Beanstalk is able to make all of these resources that we've talked about, maybe and more, but from an application developer's point of view. An application developer doesn't necessarily know how to implement those things themselves inside of AWS. They would just be overwhelmed by the sheer amount of rabbit holes to go through. So this allows an application developer to stay an application developer. Okay, so the benefits here from an operations or from an architecture point of view is that there's less communication, there's less stuff going on that's needed, because that environment can be made for an application developer, and it's not really hidden, but it's going to be made in one sweep, and then it can be integrated into, say, a larger account structure, because those are all just the resources we've been talking about. The EC2 instances, the RDS database instances, the CloudWatch, the CloudTrail, the Elastic Load Balancer, and more. All those things are potentially available for operations and for architecture personnel to use, to inspect, to configure, and more. But what's more is, guys, if you look at Elastic Beanstalk, it's actually CloudFormation. There's no such thing. Elastic Beanstalk is just a mirage. It's just an illusion. Elastic Beanstalk, it's just a wrapping paper on CloudFormation. Yeah? So we're going to, again, CloudFormation is great. It's a really powerful tool for understanding automation in general. CloudFormation is the more high-level tool that we already talked about, in every single lab you've ever done when you're creating stuff. It allows for your environment to be created essentially into a code base. Now, that does have some interesting applications, and we're going to look at that next, but that's going to be our main service when we consider automation inside of AWS. However, there are degrees, levels of automation, and that's, that might be valuable as well too. Okay. And we might also talk about that as well as Systems Manager, which is more aimed at your operations point of view. Now, actually going off and creating CloudFormation templates is pretty scary. Solutions Library, I think it's called. It is, CloudFormation has its own syntax, it has its own kind of logic after all. It's pretty hard to get started, which is why there are sample templates inside of the documentation. And I would recommend having a look at those too. And there's many places to go and have a look, one of which is this idea of the solutions page. And what this is a page chock full of pre-built templates that are created in many cases by AWS or by organizations in conjunction by partners, or even solving particular solutions with specific solutions. But the nice thing is that all of these things here, to pick one at random, Okay, they are using CloudFormation templates. Right there, you see, download the source code, download the template, off you go, deploy. So you just be able to use them off the, from a starting point as a soapbox from which just as a starting point to get with. Okay, so the point is that you're not starting from zero. You have something as a reference architecture to work with as a CloudFormation template. Another way to get running a little bit more quickly with CloudFormation is to make use of the SDK or the CDK. So we know the SDK, for those that don't know, is the CloudFormation. The SDK is for a programming language to translate into calls. The CDK is a way to understand CloudFormation templates through the lens of a software developer. Okay, so I mentioned infrastructure as code, or thinking infrastructure in terms of a application developer style. Well, the CDK is really leaning towards those developers who are already familiar with the programming language. If you're already familiar with Python, or again, rather than you learning off your own CloudFormation, which does have its own syntax, it does have its own language. CDKs, the Cloud Development Kit is a way for developers to write CloudFormation templates in their own language, in their own already known languages, okay, in JavaScript, in Python, in TypeScript, in whatever. So they use what they're familiar with and comfortable with to deploy AWS infrastructure with. It's a love-hate thing with Q. It does support a growing number of languages, and that list is expanding and it's getting better. Like GenAI is always non-deterministic, so you're going to get different answers depending on parameters and tuning.
Yeah, I was actually using it with the SageMaker AI in the code editor and in Python. And you were just supposed to be putting in like a comment, create a security group for the EC2 instance, right? And it's supposed to then come up with the code for that. Except half time didn't work. And then it would say, oh no, I'm going to give you a load balancer instead. It's almost like it was using cached entries from somewhere else.
That's really, did you have a conversation about load balancing with it at all?
I did earlier on, but not, the thing is it kept changing my comments to what it's expected to do. And it was a nightmare. I was having to keep going. Luckily, I found out later in the lab, they gave you another version of the Python to check against before you went through the CDK synth and deploy, just to see if you had mistakes. So I could cut and paste that in effect. But I spent an hour tearing my hair out, and people may see me, I don't have a lot, just to try and get Q to do something. And this was in a lab, so it wasn't real life.
Yeah. It's not. I know because I'm working with it now. It's not perfect. If like there's a lot of things that make Q. You've got to bear in mind, like, are you training a customer? Are you using Q out the box? Are you playing with the parameters of the top P, with the top K, with the context size? Are you asking it to give me more or less random answers? Is temperature part of it? Context window, prompt inject? Like, there's a lot of breadcrumbs that can confuse it. But if it's way off like that, then I can't explain. I think anyone can. Some parameter, something must have swayed the model off into some other weird
Yeah, it was just
direction.
not understanding. And I was cut and pasting the comments out of the lab guide to make sure I wasn't putting something in by mistake.
Well, Q is, there are two parts to Q. The one that I have to, Q Business is probably the one that most people, we're not going to use, but it's the expensive one. All right. So Q Business is it's a fully managed Gen AI assistant for your employees. So, well, like you have like an assistant, like an AI assistant, but it's entirely based on your company's knowledge, on your own data. So it's a very specific use case where Gen AI is for your internal company and it's trained on your internal data. So you can ask it, like, give me a product listing for a particular job role or something. And of course we have like, this role is particularly relevant to whatever your company's doing, whatever it is. So on that whole, it answers questions, it provides summaries. It needs to be a model that's been trained on your own internal data with the right security, of course, too. This is just a wrapping paper on top of Bedrock, again, because that's the foundational model. I mean, that's where the API stemmed from, but we have a lot less control. So we can't really choose what's the underlying foundational model with QBusiness. And actually, QBusiness is built up on multiple foundational models in Bedrock. So it's a service. It's a little bit higher up as a service, a little bit geared towards a very specific use case of using and exposing your company's internal data from an LLM, from a Gen AI perspective. But let's try the one that you're thinking of, which is Q Developer. If I just pull up a thingy here. So Q Developer is free, first of all, and this is one that can be found straight within your text editor. Actually, there was adverts on this. I don't know why I clicked on it yesterday. Where's my? Oh, I know why. It's because when you go to the login, that's kind of the background paper for it now. They're really pushing on it. Let's go for a bit of a demo. It's already cached. Never mind. So what it's going to be, so with Q Developer, you can, obviously this is VS Code. If you're familiar with this, it's a code editor wherein I'm able to have access to my local files on the left. I can have my own directory structure that's based on my computer. So none of this is cloud. Yes, this is all my computer, something that I've got installed from the online. And I can also find new files. I can make new code. I can write in all kind of languages. I can do whatever I want to. Copilot is kind of fighting me for attention there because that's Microsoft's own version of that. Okay, VS Code is owned by Microsoft. Okay, so if I don't want to use Microsoft's native AI tool and I play into Q, let's have a look, which is just an extension away. So the most capable Gen AI powered assistant for building, operating, and blah, 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 such and such. So I'm able to talk to it inline. So that means I can have a code review, essentially go through inline reviewing rather than waiting everything towards the end and then synthesize at the bottom. I just see what's going on line by line. I can talk to it. I can get suggestions. I can get help. I don't know why anyone would really pay for Copilot now because they all seem to do it pretty well. It's as simple as just downloading it rather than installing the plugin. And once I've got it there, there's like the video is probably better explaining here. There's a quick moment where I need to probably set up, if I do have a professional license, that's if it's tied to my internal data, which I don't have, but that would be the option. Otherwise, I could just do it for free, for freezies. So that's what I'll do. If we go off and ask it a simple question like, how does it go again? Control I. That's it. So if a Control I is for inline questions like this, yeah, sure. There's loads. ChatGPT, easy peasy. There's probably billions of ChatGPT extensions. I can use the official one or 100,000 others, which are also claiming to be as good. But they all do, like ChatGPT is great, but it's not the best for AI coding assistants. If you ask my opinion, Claude is probably the best. Claude 4, that's been released now. Cloud. So Claude, powered by Anthropic, they have a really strong, really strong coding assistant tool. It's just been trained more on that data. There's no better or worse in other regards, as good as the other general LLMs, but this one's great for coding assisting. What Q is great for is obviously understanding AWS really well, such as if I ask it for a new conversation, I say, hey, so what is a VPC? And I can have just a conversation with it if I need that interaction with someone. Let me know more about Codex from GPT. I'm not entirely... what is Codex from GPT? I'm curious. Can you link me towards that, Dennis?
It helps with coding. It's more or less a new add-on that specifically target coders.
And what does the add-on do? Is it a way of keeping my data in like a repository? How does that work?
It's just more or less a cloud-based software engineering agent that answers code-based questions, execute code, and draft. It's kind of new, I haven't tried it, but I do have a preference to chat. I've used it a lot, so I might try that one.
Yeah. Well, it's more like what GitHub is. Yeah. Huh. Okay. I would imagine so. If you can pair this up with, well, you're gonna have to pay for it, I'm afraid. You can't get this for freezies. But I think £20 a month you might be able to pay it for. With VS Code or your favorite editor, VS Code.
Yeah, I use VS Code. It's just the best.
I wouldn't know. This is very new to. Oh, probably not that new. What? How is that possible?
It wasn't there last month when I looked. Unless it was released to, sometimes they do release to some countries before they get to the UK, maybe.
No, I mean this is years and years ago. I think that's a very slow release of so.
Yeah.
But what it sounds like, it's able to better understand the pull requests and have a way of pipelining your code base, which could be helpful. I mean, gosh, I don't think Q is able to do that. What's our pull? Let me ask that. What is GPT's or OpenAI codex? So let's see that it can handle questions outside of its own because what is happening here is you have, so a foundation model is, think of it like a baseline of IQ, just some trapped intelligence in a bottle. And that foundational model doesn't do anything necessarily, but if you use a foundational model atop a large language model, it could produce words. If you use it with a web scraper, it can go off and find information, and it can go off and find, maybe like now, it can go and do some research. It can make images, it can make media, it can understand, news circles. So foundational models are your baseline trained data after, if you don't have to train your own, you don't have to machine learn your own foundation model. It wouldn't really make sense for you to do that because there's a lot of them already, and many of them are already free and open source, and they too take millions of pounds to even get to that point. So you probably just use an open source foundation model, or just query it, on top of which you turn it into a large language model, something like this. Whether or not that information is correct, I'll have to double check. But it's able to at least have some awareness as to what's outside. So these things are non-deterministic in that I don't have to have coded my large language model with every single possible answer to every single possible question. It's able to generate generative AI some output, some inference as of yet from a system prompt, from a user prompt. My user prompt is this. It reads this. It will, the way that foundational models usually work is by the transformer architecture, which I'm not going to get into just in the interest of time, but it will spew out some answer which is at least plausible. It can also, because this training data is so well adapted to Amazon stuff, why choose Aurora over RDS? Okay, so we can have a conversation if I'm feeling lonely. But I think the real value comes from, that's no different from, any other large language model. It's not even that impressive, if I can say so. But what it probably is better at doing is writing a CDK for this. So build me the folks, can someone suggest for me like a retro game? Let's say Snake. Build me Snake the game, but can it be inspired by anything? Does anyone want to inspire the game? Pac-Man inspired. Okay, sure. Well, let's try Pac-Man. Build me Pac-Man the game. I'll try Tetris next. Yeah, like this. We'll try Space Invaders. We'll do Tetris. All right. So first of all, let's check if we have this project structure ready. Am I? It's not what I wanted to build, but fine. Thank you. Okay, so I didn't want it to build it in there. That's something else I've got going on. Good. I'm pleased that it's not littered everywhere. Scroll down slightly. Why is that open? It's because I have crap open from something else. No. Where are you? Oh. Oh, there it is. So, okay, make the game. And we can maybe think about implementing this in a CDK. So I don't know the first thing about game. I really don't. I'm not going to pretend I do, but we'll just take the code and run with it, okay? Pac-Man will be good. I think Pac-Man will be an interesting one to try out. Tetris 2. I've had mixed results with trying anything more difficult than this. I tried to do a shoot 'em up game before, and I was trying to do it with with AI generated art, and it was just horrible. It was a real slop. Nothing made any sense. Easy now. Okay, well I've got a challenge to beat. I've always wanted to have a. I was this close to buying a pinball machine. That's my very expensive purchase, but I didn't. Oh gosh, they're so expensive, pinball machines. I love them. I think they're the coolest thing. But they can go upwards of £2,000-3,000. I don't have that much money about a pinball machine, especially not a second-hand one. Because when they break, it's who knows how to fix that.
You can get the handheld one. Might be cheaper.
Oh, I don't want to hand. Oh, I mean, yeah, but I can just get that on an app. I want the motion of having a real physical table to work with. There's a couple of cool ones that are close to where I am. This is taking forever. That is unacceptable. Very, very, very long response there. I'm not happy with that. Okay. Let me try again, because clearly something went off there. Sorry, folks, bad example. Can you code up a game of Pac-Man? Well, there, exactly. I don't know where I was thinking so much. All right, so some screen sizes using so Pygame is a Python library. It's also importing random. So depending on the size of my monitor, going to adapt to this too. The caption is going to be Pac-Man. We're going to have a class referencing itself, closed off loop, a closed off function that relates to itself. Okay. So these are my my movements. Haha, it draws it with just a yellow circle. Draw the mouth, interesting. This, okay, fine. I'm trusting that's good. All right, let me save that first. Let me just put that into here. Sorry, I'm just trying to find where I was. Hey, oh, something happened. All right, so it was so quick. If you saw that, I think what happens is my matrix or my sprite just hits a wall or hits an enemy so quickly, and the game just doesn't know what to do, so it crashes. I'll try again. Oh, are you kidding me? They just run at me. Like, that's not a game. So the balls kind of come back, and before long, they've already started to congeal into one. There you go. It's coming to a PlayStation 5 near you. All right, end the game. That's one example of this. We'll try another one. Bad game. Let's try
Space Invaders.
Space Invaders, sure. Let's try it again. Oh no, I don't want to do that. So new file. I just use Python. So code up a game of Space Invaders. Any theme, make it snake themed, says AJ. All right, let's make snake infused. What? Did I misclick? I think that was. Sorry, folks. I've got my. What happens is my mouse has so many buttons on it that I think every now and then I just hit the side of my keyboard and it just goes off to something else. So that's what happened there. Close this up. Try one more time. And I completely closed up. That's why. So code up. Game of Space Invaders, which is snake themed. So I have a, couldn't tell you, Sarah. I have a Logitech. Oh, it does say G502 Hero. I am so happy with it. G502 Hero Logitech. It's got so many buttons on it, Sarah. And you know the best thing is, it's got this little button where I click on it, and I can choose between going for a click, 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 click. The wheel can either go individually or can scroll infinitely. Oh, I love it. And it's got all kind of buttons on the side, and it's a lot of fun. As fun as a mouse can be.
We are happy for you.
Thank you. Well, it does get in the way sometimes to close up too early. All right, well, it's not snake themed, but it's somewhat functional. And, this is all not real. If it's snake theme in the fact that it's got a snake for a logo. That's brilliant. Oh, no, I think that's a Python favicon. A Razer Basilisk. Well, you beat me on cool sounding names. Basilisk version 3 Pro. Let's ask it. So Q developer. What? Oh, I have to. Okay, so I have to say yes or no. Caesar's thumb rules. Okay, fine. I'm happy with it. So tell me about the Razer Basilisk version 3 Pro. It works as a large language model. It also codes up. It also summarizes content. It also generates media. It's an all-rounder. If that in today's age is pretty expected from a coding assistant. 11 buttons. Well, compare it versus the G502 Logitech mouse. Which is better? I am impartial to this question, but let's see what it says. That's a question that's never been asked before, but I can reason this way through. Okay. Yeah. Honestly, I couldn't tell the difference. I don't care either. A mouse is a mouse. Oh, is yours wireless? Because mine's got a wire. Oh yeah, I've got weights too. I can also choose if I want a heavier or lighter too, depending on my arms. Put it on the heavier one just for arm strength. Exercise, eh? Yeah. Yeah, okay. All right. So if the CDK, back to the point then. So if we have this in mind, sure. Can you turn this into a Lambda function using the AWS CDK? And again, this is CloudFormation. Well, what we need is this code to run on something, and I can't think of a better use case than that than Lambda. Then I'm going to think, how will this really work? Well, I can't play inside of a Lambda function. I probably need to serve this or host this somewhere. So we could have this maybe perhaps better use case as a container and then serve that on yeah, I think maybe Lambda wouldn't be the right one for this. I wouldn't put that in I would probably bet to put that in. No, I could. No, what I'll do is I'll put this in front of an API gateway. Serve it up that way. I really don't want it to do what it's doing now, which is to make a folder in this place because that's for something else I've got, but I'll clear that up later. What it will do though, no. See, it does also, again, ask me for approval. So I can either run it. I don't want to do that just for the sakes of not messing up everything else I've got. But it would be possible for it to install that if I know what I want. I haven't tried it out myself. Maybe that's one demo that I've got to get around to doing. The point being, though, that it's very useful. It generates more code, it makes more suggestions, and then it decides whether or not I want to accept it or not. Okay, so ultimately, this is data that I can talk to and helps me write code. Not only that too, but it also looks at the code that I'm writing in order to check for vulnerabilities. It also knows how to debug, and it writes it in terms of best practices. It applies best practices and best practice standards. Okay, so I spend less time faffing about with boilerplate and actually something like this. So something actually rather magical. Okay, imagine if you're coding and you've got this feature in mind. Maybe something like if you want to log every token that's ever generated in your app or something. It could be for security, it could be for auditing, but you don't want to manually write this up. The boilerplate, DynamoDB in this case, in table access, that whole class, the structure, the whole write logic, that really tedious stuff, and probably error prone, and frankly not best use of my time. If I just told the computer what I wanted, I'd have made it. So here, this is an example of a screenshot of Q Developer doing just that. And we literally just describe the task I want in plain English, no less. Create a class to save a log of the tokens generated to DynamoDB. And then it just starts working. So it doesn't spit it out just code. Okay, it actually gives us a plan. It has a actual plan for us. Okay, it has a multi-step thought. So it figures out where we are in the project, and like it said, do I want to make a directory in this place? Then it starts laying out and how it's going to integrate that again with the rest of our workspace. So all of it's inside the IDE. And this plan really lands to me too. It's not exactly a black box. Like it's not just here's your answer and take it. It does show you some reasoning too if you press it for. It brings us along for the ride too, and it learns as well with us too. So of course, it doesn't mean that we let go of our understanding. We still need to read, we still need to validate, we still need to sometimes definitely check that the right service is the one we want, not a load balance instead of whatever it was. But instead of being stuck on syntax, we can now focus on thinking, on design, on intent, and we can, of course, build faster, harder, better, faster, stronger. Okay, so this is what tools like Q go ahead and unlock. Yeah, it's like autocomplete on fast. Let's see if I can answer a couple of questions though. I think we've already covered all the relevant stuff: CloudFormation APIs, scripting, multiple questions. If I have a bit of fun. Okay, just to go off and tie this up real quick. Well, we spent a bit talking about CloudFormation stacks, which means that we had to understand what the stack actually want. But let's go this through just to take a think of these together. Okay, starting with option A. What do we think? All the provision resources that are defined in the CloudFormation template. So before we jump into any conclusions, again, the template, essentially just a blueprint, and that blueprint defines all the resources we want to create. But when we actually run the template, it provisions the resources. We bring into existence a stack, and a stack is just Amazon's way of grouping everything together so it can be managed as a single unit. Sounds promising, right? Maybe onto that thought. Option B, what do we think, folks? So all of the resources that are identified as drifted. I'm seeing C come up a lot. Okay, so consider this one: a condition in which resources are added on top of each other. Okay, so added on top of each other, added on top of each other, added on top of each other. Sounds a bit strange because stacks aren't about layering resources in a pile. Like you're probably thinking of a burger, right? And yes, but they're a way to organize and manage resources instead of, well, resources that were deployed together. Okay, sorry, Nadir. So let me break this down. If the word stack is confusing you, it's nothing too technical. The word stack, well, before I demonstrate, just to answer the question, a stack is a way of deploying things that are together. So Nadez, are you still in the middle of your course? Have you seen the way through to the end? Just let me know if what resources, if you can, sound at least familiar to you, so we can work with. As an example, if I threw the word out, S3, for example. Okay, you've just started this weekend. That's probably so you're already like 10 steps ahead of yourself there. So have you even talked of S3 and EC2s and these conversations probably haven't come up then? Oh, they have. Are you with Dan? You were with Pug. Am I right? Yeah, you are. Okay. Good news is that I think I'm going to be with you a little bit further on. So it's my responsibility now is I'm going to take care of you. He told me that is just started S3. So that's actually where you are. Okay, so you're familiar, at least this idea of a bucket or storage. No, not S3. Tell me you got to VPCs. Well, somewhere around those two modules. I can't quite remember. I'll check my text in a bit. But if you can imagine in your mind's eye this VPC as being a place and a space and time, and we deploy resources into these idea of subnets and this and that and route tables, even without knowing what the resources necessarily are, okay, we have a way to deploy things. That's the point. And those things could be compute, it could be databases, it could be monitoring tools, it could be you name it. If it exists, it's a thing. And if it's a thing that exists in Amazon's menu of items to deploy, well, that's something that could be drawn up and drafted up and deployed with CloudFormation. So let's show you an example here. What I'm going to do now is, if you don't mind me picking on you just a little bit, why don't we build something together, and we can then come back and disambiguate between A and C, because I think that's maybe where a source of confusion is. So I'm going to create a stack. Well, okay, so notice this right away. What is a stack? Well, we're going to create a stack. And why was C confusing? Okay. Maybe that is something to look at then, Chantal, okay? So a stack can be done one or two ways. You could do this the hard way, or you could do this the visual way. Which way would you like to go with, Nadez? Would you like to do this the hard way or the easy way? Please say the easy way. I'm going to go the easy way.
Is it the blue pill or is it the red pill? Which one is harder?
Well, this one is if you have not necessarily hard. Okay, let's do this. Let's do this both ways. I'm going to do the hard way first. That can be simplified with this way. Make me a CloudFormation template for an S3 bucket titled Nadez. Okay. You'll probably ask me, do which language? And okay, YAML has gone for. Easy peasy. All right. And this is saying one, well, in this case, nothing has happened, but that would be like one new line, one removed line. Okay. No, I don't want to deploy it, but I could deploy this programmatically, but I'm going to deploy this. Here, so I'm going to just take the information that's been generated out. Okay, this is the hard way. An existing template, which I can, again, it could exist in a bucket, or I could just go ahead and upload it myself as if I've already got it here, which I'll go ahead and do. I'll save it first and then I'll do it that way, okay? But save as, I'm just going to put it here so that I don't entirely lose it forever. Okay, next. What do I call it? I'll just call it Labrador. Fine. So what happens at the end? What happens when it comes to tearing it down? Do I want to preserve the stuff inside of the bucket? Because buckets are object store. It's a place to store information. If CloudFormation's job is to keep the two things in sync, if I tear down the CloudFormation template, well, what's going to happen to the associated physical resources? I.e., if I tear down the logical ID, the physical ID should also come down with it. But what if I want to keep onto it for whatever reason? Okay, that's where I get to configure this up and other bits too. Saying I don't really care for that too much, I'll just get on with the end. And in a couple of moments' time, you'll be able to visualize this as a timeline view, which is a cool new feature. You're able to see this as a timestamp thing, so what worked in what order and what things happened when. So the first API was create bucket, probably the only one, because that's the only thing we made. And before you know it, in 16 seconds time, I have a complete stack. Now, the stack is called Labrador because I just wanted to. It wasn't so hard because now we have tools by which we can hallucinate up some resources. Right? The hard way would have been a time and ago where I would have to write this out. So that's what would have been hard. Okay. The fact that I need to be in control or recognize what goes where and what is what. go through the documentation, know what I want, and put it into effect. And that involves, it's hard. So the visual way is perhaps this instead. Rather than doing it all over again, what if I want to change something about this? So this is the second way of doing this. There used to be another solution called, I can't remember what, CloudFormation Designer. It was called Designer. And it was so bad that they didn't just fix it, they just retitled it, they just killed it. They said, we'll just do it again and we'll give it a new name so that people forget that even happened, because it was awful. It was so bad. It was terrible. It was terrible. Anyway, this is the better version of just that. And there's my bucket. It's a place in space. But a bucket's not enough for me. What if I want to associate anything else that might come to mind, Adez? Just call out anything that you may have heard of, anything that you remember from your past weekend gone by. Anything at all. Because if it exists, it's going to be a resource. Remember, Chantel said the only thing that has to be necessary in a CloudFormation template is a thing you want to deploy. If we're deploying something, then we have to say what we want to deploy. So I can keep scrolling. I can't really
API
do so.
gateway.
Let's go that then. API gateway. Yep. So I'll just pop that in. And these things can link up in many ways. I'm very capable of having. Okay. So I could. What's happening here is it doesn't like me to.
Lambda.
Lambda be an easy connection. Sure. What? Huh? Why is that? I've never seen that before. That's absolutely not the case. I've used this many times. Okay, that's really weird. It says I have to use the don't know. Okay, exactly. I don't know why that didn't work. Anyway, so these things can pair up nicely and they can talk to one another the way that I wanted to. I haven't found much practical purpose in this. They still find it a bit too much. But this is really just visualizing what this is behind it. Okay. Yeah, so the things that we've looked at, the template, as scary as it is, are really just describing declaratively the resources that we know and love. So the bucket, the Lambda function, the Cognito usable, whatever that might be, in a declarative way. So I say what I want, I put it in my shopping list, I check out the supermarket, and then I get what I want. How I can make those talk to one another is really up to it's up to the specifics of the service. So should this bucket want to become public? Should I deny this from the get-go? Should I have other parameters that make it what it is? Then I have to go into the individual, but that involves me knowing enough about the product to say that's how it fits into this particular way. So it's a way of throwing things on a page, such as that I end up with, this probably won't work, but I'll try. Oh, and this is just saying, okay, well, this information, the actual template itself must live in a bucket, and this is why it's randomly generated as well, and this and that. So it makes a bucket, but that bucket is simply just to store the information about the stack. So that stack, remember, it's just a way to logically group together resources and to manage resources per application or per things I want together. Because the moment I deploy this, there's not really an awful lot that distinguishes this from from anything else. Yep, that's fine. I know what I'm doing. Okay, so my stack is updated. Notice I've still the same stack as earlier. I've just modified it. I didn't think it was going to work. The API gateway probably needs a bit of work, as well as the Lambda function. There's too much I haven't really said about it. Yeah, the Lambda function, okay, it needs a bit of work, but that's fine. I can rework it. I haven't lost everything though. I sort of have this in such a place where, leaning on principles of software development, like as an application developer would do, they would debug their code and they would be able to persist it, put that under the microscope and get it to work. What if I do this though? What if What if, okay, what if I do this? Because what I can now do is have a stack set and, oh, no, condition which resources are, let me just go back to QDeveloper. I'm sort of bringing everything together as one. Where are you? Shift and I, Control I. Can you create a condition wherein resources can be, I don't know what that condition is. I'll leave it up to dealer's choice, see what it does. So I'm just leading you to think a little bit about the question, which is, what is a stack and what is a condition? Are they the same thing? The answer is no. So conditions, hint, hint, nudge, nudge, don't appear here, but they will do briefly if this works. Okay. Okay. So again, thinking about putting your programmer hat on, if and else and all those conditional logic statements would appear as lines as well in your CloudFormation template. Doesn't really show me what I was looking for. That's awful. That is absolutely pants. Edit inline. And add condition policy to whether the bucket already exists. Just, simple example. So rather than me having the effort of checking myself, it's only going to work if it doesn't already exist. If there's no already existing bucket by that name, which just would, be a problem if it did. Okay, so I'm fighting with it to make it work, but it's still less time than it would be for me to go off and go to the documentation. That's fine. I'm telling you to do it. Oh, I know why. It's because I changed the download. That's fine. That's fine. Hands up, was my fault. but there it goes. Okay, so condition. Okay. There you go. All right, so now this new line here, this inclusion of the new line of, I'm going to make a bucket. Okay, that this value references to this variable here. This variable means that this condition will only apply, rather this will only work if there is no already existing bucket. If that's a way of wrapping your head around this too. So just in answer to your question, good night, AJ, as well. I'm seeing people are having to go off, and rightly so, enjoy their evenings. Just to kind of answer this question off though, C, a condition in which resources are added on top of each other. Well, that's not really what a stack is necessarily. The wording of a stack, the wording of this question kind of maybe leads you to think, oh, it's kind of grouping by resources, but that's a stack. I think a condition is a condition, I think in that case. All right. Lastly as well, the properties of a single resource. Well, I'm glad no one saw that. Yeah, this feels a little bit too narrow too. Properties. Again, so a stack isn't just about a single resource, like we just saw in my failed template here. It can have multiple resources. I only got around to making one, but it's not uncommon for me to have many. If I, for example, this, yeah. So this is another stack in which I have multiple resources, and these resources are allowing me to group or define multiple resources, and then that's all represented by one stack. Okay, so all these resources is going to be represented all stacked together. Okay, so the definition is a little bit off. Where does that leave us? B says Valentine, all the resources that are identified and drifted. Interesting. Do you have any siblings, Valentine? If I can ask that question. And if so, are your siblings a bit nosy? Because I know mine are. So what happens is I go on holiday or I'm away for the bit, and I leave at home, my room where I've got my stuff, in such a way I know where things are because I left them there. Okay. So I've got my bed, I've got my bits and bobs, I've got my shelf, I've got all my gizmos. Okay. The way I left it. I turn my head, I come back a year later, and I notice all my gizmos are kind of a little bit different. My gizmos that were here now appear over there. In effect, things have changed. Things have drifted off. So what I was expecting in such a way actually turned out to be a little bit further on later the other way. So this idea of drift is when you leave resources or infrastructure in a particular way, in a particular form, but over time, over enough like bugs, inconsistencies, software more generally, it actually changes or drifts off like a bit of, driftwood, okay, as if it just go on the water. So that is a possibility, and CloudFormation can tell you if drift has been detected, but that's not defining what there we go. So detect drift. It seems to be all fine. No drifts. All right. But if there was drift, I would know. All right. I think that leaves us with A. Hey. All right. So A, exactly. Like, again, just essentially just the blueprint, all the provision resources that are defined in a template, all the provision resources in a template, all the provisioned resources, a bucket or more, okay? All these things which are defined in a template. That is what that is a stack. Yeah. So that would be the best definition of a stack. All right. If that's making sense, I think that'll be a good point to pause it. Okay. I'm going to clean up a little bit here just in the meantime before I forget. But folks, that would be a good point to park up for the evening. It has been quite a fun one. I'm glad we did this session. It's been more fun than I thought. Are there any questions? Of course, do not be shy. Nick, been a pleasure. Thank you as well for dropping by. It's thank you for joining as well. I'm going to play my Pac-Man game that I've coded up all evening. Best way to harass me would be my website, probably. Go off and talk to me there. Hunky dory. All right there. So I'll catch up with you when I next see you, folks.